The war began with a lie. Humanity had placed its trust in the Galactic Concord, believing that the great alliance of alien civilizations would honor their promises. When the Dominion fleet arrived in human space, bringing fire and death, Earth sent desperate calls for aid. The Concord's response was cold and calculated. They deemed humanity a lost cause and withdrew all support, sealing the fate of billions. Earth's colonies burned as Dominion warships unleashed destruction, and the homeworld itself fell under siege. The skies turned black with smoke, the oceans boiled, and the once thriving cities were reduced to ruins. The Concorde had not only abandoned humanity, they had sentenced it to death. The few survivors, scattered across dying worlds and wrecked space stations, understood a bitter truth: they were alone. No one would come to help them. No one would avenge their fallen. If humanity was to survive, it had to become something else, something ruthless, something relentless, something the galaxy would never forget. In the darkness of the void, the last remnants of humanity gathered. They were not politicians or diplomats anymore. Those had died with Earth. The survivors were engineers, scientists, and warriors, driven by grief, rage, and an unbreakable will to endure. They hid in the shattered remains of their colonies, scavenging Dominion wrecks for technology, breaking into abandoned Concorde stations to steal whatever resources they could find. They knew they could never match the Dominion in numbers, nor could they stand against the full might of the Concorde. But they didn't need to. They didn't need an army. They needed a weapon. And so, deep within the remains of a forgotten moon, they began to build their answer. The warship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was forged from stolen Dominion technology, enhanced by human ingenuity, and powered by the desperation of a species with nothing left to lose. It was sleek, fast, and armed with weapons designed not just to kill, but to terrify. Its hull was reinforced with experimental alloys, its systems guided by an artificial intelligence that could outthink and outmaneuver entire fleets. The ship had no name at first, only a purpose. But as its creators watched it take form, they knew exactly what to call it. Nemesis. It was more than a ship, it was a declaration. Humanity was not dead. It had not been wiped out, as the Concorde and Dominion believed. It had survived, and now it would rise again, not as victims, but as hunters. The day the Nemesis was completed, there was no grand ceremony, no speeches. There was only silence, the quiet hum of its engines as it powered up for the first time. The crew, a handful of hardened survivors, took their places on the bridge. Each of them had lost everything: their homes, their families, their future. Now, they had only one purpose: vengeance. They set a course for the nearest Dominion outpost, a minor refueling station that had once belonged to humans before it was taken by force. It was lightly defended, its crew arrogant in their belief that humanity was no longer a threat. The attack was swift and merciless. The Nemesis did not simply destroy the outpost, it erased it. There were no survivors, no distress calls. Only wreckage drifting through space, a ghostly reminder that something had changed. The first strike was just the beginning. The Nemesis moved like a phantom, slipping through enemy lines, striking without warning, and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Dominion warships sent to investigate disappeared one by one. Concorde convoys found themselves under attack by an enemy they had once dismissed as weak. Fear spread through the ranks of those who had betrayed humanity. Whispers of a ghost ship, a war machine built for revenge, began to circulate. At first, the Concorde refused to believe it. Humanity had been wiped out, hadn't it? But then a Concorde patrol stumbled upon the ruins of a command station, its walls scorched with plasma burns, its defenses ripped apart with terrifying precision. A single message was left behind, burned into the metal of the main control deck. The Dominion's leaders, once so confident in their victory, began to feel the weight of their mistake. They had underestimated the resilience of the species they had tried to exterminate. They had left humans to perish, but instead they had created something far worse, a force that did not fear them, did not seek mercy, and would not stop until justice was served. And so, as the Nemesis disappeared into the depths of space, its legend grew. It was no longer just a warship. It was a promise, a promise that humanity had returned, and that those who had betrayed them would soon know the true meaning of fear. The Dominion warship Varish drifted silently through the darkness of space, its crew unaware that death was already approaching. It was a massive vessel, armed with the latest plasma cannons and shielded by advanced Dominion defenses. For years, ships like Varish had hunted humanity, crushing its colonies, leaving planets in ruin. The crew of the warship did not fear retaliation after all. Humanity was nothing more than a forgotten relic, a species abandoned by the Concord and left to perish in the void. But what the Dominion did not know was that humanity had not died. It had transformed, hardened by betrayal, and sharpened by vengeance. And now, in the cold silence of the void, humanity's answer was coming. The Nemesis was already here, hidden in the shadow of a dead moon, watching, waiting. Its weapons were primed, its crew silent, their hearts steady with purpose. They had waited years for this moment, and now it was time to strike. Without warning, the Nemesis moved. It didn't appear on the Dominion warship sensors until it was too late. A single shot lanced through the darkness, a projectile moving faster than light, designed not to destroy but to cripple. The Varish shuddered as its engines died, its power core ruptured. Alarms blared as the Dominion crew scrambled, trying to understand what had happened. But before they could react, the second strike came. A wave of electromagnetic pulses ripped through the ship's systems, frying communications and shutting down weapons. The crew was blind, helpless, trapped in their own fortress. And then the boarding began. The Nemesis did not fire another shot. It did not need to. Instead, it latched onto the Dominion warship like a predator, sinking its claws into prey. The hull was breached, airlocks forced open, and from the darkness, human warriors emerged. They wore no heavy armor, carried no bulky weapons. They did not need them. They were fast, precise, and merciless. Within minutes, the corridors of the Varish were filled with echoes of battle. Dominion soldiers, trained to fight lesser species, found themselves facing something far worse: humans with nothing left to lose. The Dominion captain tried to send a distress signal, but the ship's systems were already under human control. The Nemesis had planned for everything, disabling the warship in ways the Dominion had never encountered before. The captain's last sight was the cold stare of a human soldier before a single shot ended his command. One by one, the crew fell. Some fought, some begged, some tried to hide, but none escaped. The Dominion warship had become a tomb. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The Nemesis disengaged, leaving behind only silence. When Dominion reinforcements finally arrived, they found the Varish still drifting, untouched except for one thing. The bodies were gone. Every single Dominion soldier had vanished, leaving behind only empty corridors and a single message burned into the command console: humanity remembers. Panic spread faster than light. The Dominion had believed humans were extinct, a forgotten species wiped from existence. But now, something else was hunting them, something that did not fight like an empire, that did not play by the rules of war. The attack on the Varish was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Dominion supply lines began to collapse. Cargo ships vanished without a trace. Military outposts were found abandoned, their defenses intact, their personnel missing. There were no signs of battle, no distress calls, only silence. Whispers spread across the stars, rumors of a ghost ship, a war machine built for revenge. The Concord dismissed the stories as myths, calling them the delusions of frightened soldiers. But the Dominion knew better. They had seen the wreckage, had read the messages left behind. This was not a rumor. This was real. And it was only getting worse. On the Concord capital world, the High Council convened in secrecy. For the first time in history, their greatest fear was not an invading empire or a rebellion within their own ranks. Their greatest fear was something they had once abandoned without a second thought. The council members spoke in hushed tones, reviewing reports that made their blood run cold. The Dominion fleet was losing ships at an alarming rate. Every attempt to track the Nemesis had failed. It appeared from nowhere, struck without warning, and disappeared before anyone could react. This was not how wars were fought. This was not how enemies behaved. The Concord had expected humanity to die quietly. Instead, it had returned as a nightmare that refused to be ignored. The Dominion, once arrogant and unstoppable, now found itself in a desperate race to find and destroy the Nemesis before it was too late. But they did not understand what they were facing. They still believed this was just a rogue human warship, a remnant of a defeated species. What they did not realize, what they could not even begin to comprehend, was that the Nemesis was just the beginning. Humanity had been betrayed, but it had survived. And now it was hunting. Not for conquest, not for power, but for justice. And it would not stop until every last traitor had paid the price. The stars, once cold and indifferent, now held a new kind of terror. A war had begun, not one of empires, but of vengeance. And in the darkness of space, the Nemesis watched, waiting for its next prey. The Concord and Dominion had finally decided to act. For months, their warships had been vanishing, their outposts left abandoned. Fear had taken root in the highest levels of command, and fear led to desperation. The rulers of the Dominion, once arrogant in their power, now sat in silent meetings, their pride shattered by the ghostly menace that stalked them through the stars. The Nemesis had become more than a warship. It was a legend, a nightmare whispered among terrified soldiers who now hesitated before stepping onto their own bridges. But the Dominion and Concord were not fools. They knew that no enemy, no matter how elusive, was invincible. If the Nemesis could be drawn into the open, it could be destroyed. And so, they set their trap. It was a perfect plan, one designed to lure the human warship into a battlefield it could not escape. The Concord leaked false intelligence of a heavily guarded Dominion weapons convoy carrying experimental technology. The data was carefully spread across secret channels, ensuring the Nemesis would intercept it. The convoy itself was nothing more than bait, a fleet of seemingly vulnerable transports escorted by a few outdated warships. The real threat lay in the shadows, an armada of Dominion and Concord vessels hidden within a nearby asteroid field, warships with weapons primed, waiting for the moment the Nemesis took the bait. They would surround it, disable its systems, and crush it before it could slip away. The trap was set, the fleet waited in silence, and the only thing left was for the Nemesis to arrive. And it did. The Dominion sensors picked up the ghostly silhouette of the warship as it emerged from the void, moving with terrifying precision. There was no hesitation, no delay. The Nemesis struck like a predator, firing a barrage of hyperkinetic rounds that tore through the decoy fleet. Within moments, the transports were in flames, their escorts scattered. The Dominion admiral, watching from the safety of the hidden armada, smiled. The warship had fallen for their trick. With a single command, the trap was sprung. From the darkness of the asteroid field, hundreds of warships surged forward, energy cannons charging, missile bays opening. The space around the Nemesis turned into a death zone, a storm of laser fire and torpedoes meant to tear it apart. But as the first salvo struck, something was wrong. The Nemesis did not evade. It did not run. It simply drifted in place, as if waiting. And then the trap turned against its makers. The Dominion's fleet sensors flickered. At first, the officers believed it was a system malfunction, but the truth was far worse. The enemy warship had activated something, a pulse, invisible to the eye, but deadly to every piece of technology in its range. Weapons shut down mid-fire, shields flickered and failed, and targeting systems fell into chaos. The Dominion officers screamed into their comms, demanding answers, but there were none. The Nemesis had deployed a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, an electromagnetic disruptor, powerful enough to cripple an entire fleet in seconds. But that was only the beginning. The Nemesis had not come alone. From the darkness, smaller vessels emerged, and disappeared before the enemy could react. They slipped through the broken ranks of the fleet, cutting down helpless warships one by one. Dominion captains, once confident in their numbers, now found themselves unable to fight back. Their cannons would not fire, their engines refused to engage, and one by one, their ships became floating graves. Some tried to escape, turning their vessels toward hyperspace lanes, but the Nemesis was ready for them. Gravitic mines, placed long before the battle began, detonated, ripping through anything that attempted to flee. The battlefield became a graveyard, and the hunters moved methodically, ensuring that no one survived. The Concord admiral, watching in horror, realized the truth too late. This had never been a battle. It had never been a trap for the Nemesis. Humanity had known about the plan from the beginning. It had let them think they were in control, let them believe they could dictate the terms of war. But humans did not fight wars like the Concord or Dominion. They did not rely on brute strength or numbers. They relied on strategy, on deception, on striking before the enemy even knew they were in danger. The Concord had not trapped the Nemesis. The Nemesis had trapped them. ASS. The last Dominion warship was reduced to drifting wreckage. The Nemesis sent out a single transmission, broadcasted across all known frequencies. It was not a threat, nor a demand. It was a message, a warning. You left us to die. You thought we would perish. Now we hunt. There is no place safe for those who betray humanity. And with that, the Nemesis vanished once more into the darkness, leaving behind only destruction and silence. The Concord and Dominion had thought they were the masters of war. They had thought they understood how battles were fought, how enemies were crushed. But they had never faced an enemy like this. They had never faced a species that had lost everything and yet refused to die. And now they had made a mistake they would never recover from. The war had changed. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time in history, the most feared force in the galaxy was not an empire, nor an armada. It was a single warship, a ghost in the void, a legend whispered in fear. And it would not stop until justice was served. The Concord's capital world, Velsera Prime, had never known war. It was a planet of towering spires, shimmering blue oceans, and endless cities bathed in golden light. Protected by the strongest fleets and secured by unbreakable defenses, it stood as the heart of the galactic order, a place where rulers dictated the fates of entire species from the safety of their council chambers. But now, fear gripped its people. The war they had once dismissed as a minor disturbance had reached their doorstep. The Nemesis had come. For months, humanity had been a phantom in the dark, striking without warning, dismantling fleets, crippling supply lines, and leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The Dominion had already suffered catastrophic losses, their warships reduced to drifting wreckage. But the Concord had believed themselves untouchable, hidden behind layers of defense grids and planetary shields, surrounded by an armada so vast that no enemy could breach it. That illusion shattered the moment the alarms blared across Velsara Prime. The orbital defense network, a structure of automated battle stations and planetary turrets, began to fail one after another, their systems shutting down as if infected by a virus. Fleet commanders rushed to their stations, sending out emergency signals, but communications were lost. The Concord had prepared for every known military strategy, every conventional attack. But humanity did not fight like the empires of the galaxy. It did not send grand fleets to conquer. It did not challenge enemies in open battle. It struck like a storm, unexpected and merciless. And today, that storm had arrived. In the darkness of space, the Nemesis emerged, not alone, but leading an armada of human warships. These were not the crude vessels the Concord had once dismissed as primitive. They were sleek, fast, and bristling with weapons the galaxy had never seen before. They moved with terrifying precision, slipping through the chaos of the failing defense systems, cutting through the outer perimeter before the Concord could react. The first explosions ripped through the orbital stations, sending debris plummeting into the planet's atmosphere. Fires lit up the sky as panicked citizens looked upward, realizing, for the first time, that their world was no longer safe. The Concord fleet scrambled to respond, launching thousands of warships to intercept the invaders. But the moment they entered battle, they understood the truth. This was not a fight. This was an execution. The Nemesis and its fleet moved like hunters, picking apart the Concord warships with a ruthless efficiency that left no room for survival. Hyperkinetic projectiles tore through armor, energy disruptors shut down entire squadrons, and before the Concord admirals could even issue full retreat orders, half of their fleet was already burning. The enemy they had abandoned, the species they had left to die, had become the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. And there was no stopping it now. On the surface of Velsera Prime, the ruling council gathered in panic, their voices filled with disbelief. Never had their world been under siege. Never had they imagined that humans could reach them. But the truth was undeniable. The war had turned. Humanity was not fighting for survival anymore. It was hunting its betrayers. The planetary shields, once thought indestructible, flickered as hidden saboteurs struck from within, agents who had been living among the Concord for years, waiting for this moment. Explosions tore through the cityscape as key facilities were destroyed from the inside. Chaos erupted in the streets. Concord soldiers struggled to contain the uprising, but it was futile. The humans had planned this down to the smallest detail. There was no escape. Then the final blow came. The Nemesis, having torn through the last of the orbital fleet, descended toward the capital, a massive shadow against the burning sky. Its weapons locked onto the Council's headquarters, the very heart of the Concord's power. The rulers of the galaxy, who had once dictated the fates of entire species, now found themselves staring at their own destruction. Desperation filled their final transmissions, pleas for surrender, cries for mercy. But they had shown humanity none when they left them to perish. And now, mercy was a forgotten concept. The first shot obliterated the council chambers in an instant, sending shockwaves across the city. The second and third tore through the last defensive lines. By the time the dust settled, the Concord government was gone, its leaders dead, its empire shattered. Across the galaxy, news of the fall spread like wildfire. The unthinkable had happened. The most powerful force in the universe had crumbled in a single night. Fear gripped the remaining Dominion forces, their fleets retreating into the void, no longer fighting for victory, but for survival. And in the center of it all, the Nemesis stood victorious, a symbol of humanity's vengeance. But the war was not over. It had only changed. Humanity had proven that it would not be erased, that it would not be forgotten. And now, with the Concord fallen, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. The old order had collapsed. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive, but whether it would now rule. And as the stars burned with the remnants of its enemies, the answer became clear. Humanity was no longer the hunted. It had become the hunter. And the war was far from finished. The war was nearly over, but humanity was not finished. The Dominion was broken, its fleets shattered and scattered across the void. The Concord had fallen, its homeworld reduced to burning ruins. The ones who had once ruled the stars now hid in dark corners of the galaxy, fleeing from the relentless force that hunted them. And at the center of it all was the Nemesis, the warship that had become more than a vessel. It was a symbol of vengeance, a nightmare that haunted the remnants of those who had betrayed humanity. But there was one last hunt left. The Dominion's Supreme War Council, those who had orchestrated the genocide of Earth, those who had given the order to abandon humanity, had escaped. They had fled to the outer edges of the galaxy, hiding in an uncharted system, protected by what was left of their once mighty armadas. They believed they could survive. They believed they could wait for time to weaken their enemy, that they could rebuild in the shadows. But they did not understand humans. The hunt began in silence. No grand fleets, no formal declarations. Just the whisper of something moving through the darkness, something unseen but always present. One by one, Dominion strongholds in the outer systems began to fall. Supply depots were found in ruins. Warships were discovered drifting, their crews slaughtered without a sound. The survivors spoke of something invisible, something that struck and vanished before alarms could be raised. They begged for reinforcements, but there were none left to send. The War Council, hidden deep within a fortress world built to withstand entire invasions, watched in growing terror as their forces dwindled. Every day. Then, the darkness arrived at their doorstep. The Dominion Fortress world was a bastion of security, surrounded by planetary shields, orbital cannons, and what remained of the Dominion's best warriors. No one had ever breached it. No one had ever even tried. But the Nemesis did not fight wars like the Concord or Dominion. It did not attack where they were strongest. It attacked where they did not expect. The first sign was the silence. Communications with the outer defense stations suddenly ceased, their signals replaced with eerie static. Next, the automated turrets designed to detect and destroy incoming threats began shutting down, their systems failing one after another. The Dominion officers scrambled to react, sending patrols to investigate. None returned. And then the sky burned. The Nemesis emerged from the void, its weapons tearing through the orbital defenses with surgical precision. Before the Dominion could even coordinate a response, explosions rocked the capital cities below. The War Council watched in horror as entire districts vanished in fire, as their last warships tried and failed to push back against the unrelenting force. Panic set in. There was no escape. Every possible route had been cut off. The humans had not just come to destroy them, they had come to make sure they never left. The final battle was not a battle at all. It was an execution. Dominion commanders, once so confident in their superiority, found themselves powerless as human strike teams infiltrated the planet's core facilities, shutting down power grids, disabling security networks, and turning the fortress world into a tomb. The War Council, now trapped within their last refuge, a heavily fortified underground bunker, made their final transmissions, sending desperate pleas to any remaining Dominion forces in the galaxy. But no one answered. There was no one left to come for them. And then, the doors to their chamber opened. The War Council members turned, their alien eyes wide with fear as human soldiers stepped inside, their weapons raised but not firing. They did not need to. The war was already over. The leader of the Dominion, once the most powerful being in the known universe, fell to his knees, his voice shaking as he tried to speak, to beg. But there was no mercy left to give. Humanity had not forgotten what had been done to them. They had not forgotten the screams of their people as their home burned, the silence of the void where their colonies had once thrived. And they would not allow those responsible to escape judgment. The execution was swift. No words. No speeches. Just a single shot that ended an empire. With the Dominion's last leaders dead, the galaxy held its breath. The Nemesis sent out a transmission, a message broadcasted across all known channels, reaching every remaining faction, every surviving world. The warning was simple. This is the fate of those who betray humanity. We do not seek war, but we do not forgive. If you raise a hand against us, we will not stop until nothing remains of you. And then silence. The war was over, but its echoes would never fade. The Nemesis did not stay to claim territory. It did not demand tribute or impose rule. Humanity did not seek to conquer the galaxy. It had never wanted war. It had only wanted to survive. And now, after years of destruction, it had ensured that no one would ever threaten it again. The remaining factions of the galaxy, those who had once mocked humanity, now whispered in fear. They knew the truth. The most dangerous force in the universe was not the largest empire, nor the most advanced technology. It was the species that refused to die. And so, the Nemesis disappeared once more into the void, its mission complete. But the galaxy would never forget. The lesson had been written in fire, in blood, in the ruins of the once mighty empires that had dared to cross humanity. The war was over, but the warning remained. Never again would humanity be left to perish. Never again would it be forgotten. It was no longer a species struggling to survive. It was a force to be reckoned with. And for the first time in history, the galaxy understood what it had unleashed. The hunt had ended, but humanity's legend had only just begun.